Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Parkdale-High Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's a pleasure for me to be able to speak on Bill C-475 on the issue of privacy and digital communications. Now, the whole privacy issue has been a thorny one for Conservatives. Last year, they had Bill C-30, the online snooping bill, which triggered a huge countrywide backlash, and so many Canadians were concerned about that bill because it proposed some very serious invasions of privacy and an attack on the fundamental rights and freedoms of Canadians. But privacy is also an issue because we've seen increasingly of late so many federal government departments, including HRSDC and Indian Affairs, have lost personal information that they have collected from Canadians. But the good news for Canadians, Mr. Speaker, is that the NDP Digital Affairs Critic, the MP from Terrebonne-Blanville, has been on the job defending Canadians' interests. And we thank her for introducing Bill C-475, which is an excellent response for our times on the issue of digital privacy and personal information. Now, Bill C-475 responds to a number of calls for greater security for this public information. There was a study which was led by the NDP last year in the Ethics Committee on social media and privacy, and that committee and that study heard numerous calls from the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, from legal experts around Internet security, consumer protection groups, and of course concerned citizens for the need to update the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, lengthy act, commonly known as PIPEDA. And there are many ways that this bill can be updated, but the fact is it has not been updated since the year 2000. Now, if we think back to the year 2000, that was a long time ago. It was before the era of iPads, before the era of smartphones, and it was at a time when Canadians voluntarily shared much more of their information. So times have changed dramatically, but because our laws have not changed and have not offered Canadians more protection during that period, not surprisingly, more and more Canadians are losing confidence in the government to be able to protect their privacy when it comes to PIPEDA. And what this bill would do in a nutshell, and I'll just summarize it before going into it in more detail, is it would ensure, first of all, that Canadians are notified if there is a breach to the security of their personal information, where that breach could actually cause them harm. It would also add new strengths to the compliance part. Right now, the Privacy Commissioner doesn't have much power in order to enforce compliance, and unlike many other countries in the world, so it would bring Canada onto a level playing field with many other countries. The issue of online privacy is one of growing concern. We are now in an age of big data, where companies are data mining, they are gathering personal information from a variety of sources, and they're using this information for marketing, for advertising, for personalized ads, for all kinds of measures, and there's nothing to protect the privacy of Canadians. there's nothing to protect Canadians' personal data when there is a data breach that could cause them harm. So what we found in the ethics study of this issue was that there is increasing commodification of this data, called big data, by companies online so that they can do marketing. With personal information is often collected, used, disclosed to other parties, and the person whose information is collected often has no idea that this was even happening. They certainly didn't give consent, and it is in violation of PIPEDA. Now, throughout the ethics study, there were repeated calls by Internet and privacy experts, civil society groups, to empower the Privacy Commissioner of Canada with enforcement powers and to introduce mandatory data breach notifications. So that's exactly what Bill C-475 would do. And again, I want to thank my colleague from Terrebonne-Blainville for her excellent work on this issue and her tailoring of this bill to really respond to this very recent study in updating this legislation. So again, what C-475 would do is it would give enforcement powers to the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. It would allow the Privacy Commissioner to order an organization which is found to be in violation of PIPEDA to undertake actions to comply with the Act. And if they don't comply with the orders within a timeline established by the Commissioner, they could be liable to a fine of up to $500,000 as determined by a federal court. So a very serious penalty if they're given the opportunity to comply with the Act and fail to do it. Secondly, it would introduce mandatory data breach notification where there is possible risk of harm to individuals whose information has been compromised, that these individuals must be notified. Now, if anyone thinks that these are by any means radical measures, I'm sure they sound like a lot of common sense to Canadians. Other jurisdictions, many other jurisdictions, already have such measures in law. Countries such as the UK, France, Germany, Australia, and some provinces have this provision in law. British Columbia, Alberta, and Quebec have commissioners responsible for data protection or privacy equipped with enforcement powers to force organizations to comply with the law. It seems like good common sense. These enforcement powers for all of these other jurisdictions include administrative monetary penalties. So Canada is behind the times when it comes to PIPEDA and the lack of enforcement and the lack of notification. What are others saying about this legislation brought in by our colleague from Terrebonne-Blainville? Well, OpenMedia.ca Executive Director Steve Anderson says, and I quote, "We welcome the MP's online privacy bill. This bill is a useful stepping stone to safeguard our privacy." Also, Michael Geist, Chair of Internet and E-commerce Law at the University of Ottawa. He's a renowned public affairs commentator. He often has a column in my local newspaper in Toronto. And he said, and I quote, "Bill C-475 is a far better proposal. These provisions would go far to ensure greater respect for Canadian privacy law and give Canadians the assurance of notifications in the event of security breaches." Mr. Speaker, I see my time is just about up. Let me just say in conclusion, I know that the people I represent in Parkdale-High Park, we have many young artists, young communicators, people who work in digital media. I've heard many calls for this kind of privacy legislation. It's long overdue, and I would urge all members of this House to vote in favour of Bill C-475. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.